Controller DiNapoli is joining me now from New York City. Good evening, Controller. How are you?
Hey, Liz, I'm well.
So let's talk just right off the bat about FiberMark. This is the upstate paper and fiber company that I was referencing. Do you want to just give a brief overview about that?
Very simply, this is an example of the investment strategy that Mr. Wilson utilized when he was at Silver Point, the hedge fund that he was a partner at. Under his guise of being a restructuring expert, I think we need to look at what happened to the employees at FiberMark. It's located in Lowville in Lewis County. We saw retiree health benefits cut, wages and benefits cut, employees laid off, and a very aggressive management style where the National Labor Relations Board had to come in because of that very overly aggressive style that Mr. Wilson even acknowledged. And then as hedge funds do, they then sell the interest in the company and they move on. And what was left behind were many people hurt, and we've heard that testimony from the workers there. That's not the kind of restructuring we need in New York government, where you don't consider the human consequences, the impact on people of your decisions.
Okay, well, first of all, he has said, he did agree that, this is from a Buffalo News report, that there was overzealousness on the part of FiberMark's former management, but he also said basically that in order to save the company, there needed to be a really drastic effort to restructure it. Let's just take a look at your ad that features actually some workers from FiberMark.
Even on Mr. Wilson's website, it says he takes out waste and inefficiencies in companies, and he took out people.
This was people that have been with the company for 30, 35 years, had to refinance their mortgages because they took such cuts.
Okay, so there's no doubt that this is very painful, and clearly, and it hurts some people extremely badly. But here's the problem. What does this have to do with the Comptroller's office? I mean, even Dennis Hughes, who is the president of the AFL-CIO, who has endorsed you, said, and I quote, "I'm not saying Harry did anything other than follow standard business practices in this industry, and I don't connect it with the Comptroller's race at all."
Well, I think he said some other things at the press conference that I was at with Dennis, where we unveil these videos. It really gets to the question of values, and this election is a choice between the middle-class values that I represent and the worst of the Wall Street values that Harry Wilson represents. What happened at FiberMark is an example of corporate greed and putting personal profit above the long-term best interests of not only the company and the corporation, but of the people who work there, who create the profits. There are ways to do a restructuring.
Well,
there are
okay,
ways to include labor at the table. That didn't happen at FiberMark.
How would you have done it then? Let's argue that you were in Harry Wilson's place. How would you have done it?
Yeah, well, I made a choice a long time ago to serve the public, not to be a hedge fund executive.
I understand.
So let's be clear, I wouldn't be in that place. But from my expertise as someone who worked as a manager in the corporate sector, who has a graduate degree in human resources management and a certificate in labor relations, what I would do, which is what the proper leadership should do, is that you call the stakeholders around the table, and you work with labor, especially in the case of FiberMark, where you had organized labor, you had a union that could speak for the workers, and you say, we need to have a shared vision and a common agenda to save this company, to save as many jobs as we can, and to keep it as a quality workplace. That didn't happen here. They tried to really grind the workers into the ground. In Lewis County, a county that has had struggles of many of our upstate counties have had in terms of the employment situation. Those kind of ads where someone like Harry Wilson made millions of dollars while people of long tenure with that company were hurt, those are not the kind of values that should be reflected in the Comptroller's office, where you need to look out for the best interests of the public, and you need to protect the pensions of the people who work for state and local government.
To be fair, let me ask you this. The company, was it not worth saving? I mean, arguably, if you couldn't save it by forcing concessions, and the gentleman who Harry Wilson claims at any rate was responsible for the overzealousness was actually let go. So was it not worth making changes? Hold on. Was it not worth making changes then to save the company?
No, not the way it was done there. The damage was done. You know, they brought in, they were a vulture fund. They went in, they bought up the company. They brought in management that was trying to grind these workers into the ground. Many workers and families were hurt. The National Labor Relations Board had to get involved. That's the only way they were able to come up with an agreement. That's not the kind of corporate behavior that we should reward by letting someone who made millions off of those kinds of actions. We didn't talk about the accredited home lending, the other investment that Silver Point was involved in, where people lost their homes as part of the foreclosure crisis that we've had, and then taking those millions and, as you know, putting now I think about $4 million of those gains to try to buy this office.
Okay,
no, that's not what we need in the controller's office.
I understand that you are trying to paint this as a choice between Wall Street values and Main Street values, or middle class values.
But let's be clear. You know, there's a lot that's important about Wall Street. We're talking about the worst of the Wall Street values, the hedge fund world, those that put personal profit and corporate greed at the expense of larger social interest and goals.
So you wouldn't have any problem necessarily with somebody who had Wall Street experience being controller, assuming you were no longer controller. You wouldn't have a problem with that.
Look, you know, this is a public office. The public will decide who they want to see. You know, people come to this office with various kinds of background. It tends not to be a public office where Wall Street experiences the requisite background, because there's a great variety of responsibilities of this office. You hire the team of people, you provide the leadership. The controller is not the chief investment officer for the retirement fund. You hire someone for that job. So I think there's often been a confusion as to what this job is about. You have responsibilities for auditing, for contract, for unclaimed funds, for the oil spill fund, for the payroll for the state. There's a lot that has nothing to do, you know, with finance or Wall Street. That's why traditionally this office has not been a stepping stone from Wall Street.
So you don't believe necessarily that you have to have investment experience to be the controller?
Well, that's clear. You look at everyone who's been the controller. You know, look at their experience in terms of where they came from. It is a public office. It's usually been people who've served in some public position. A legislator has often been the experience. Carl McCall, certainly. Arthur Levitt, the longest serving controller. You know, he was a lawyer, served on the New York City Board of Education. I served on the Board of Education as well at one point. So that's the more typical experience, because it's about the leadership and the understanding that this is an important public office that has been the path for people to be controller.
You know, you brought up the cash disparity just a minute ago, I believe, or at least the amount of money that Harry Wilson has put into his campaign. At this point, as of today, actually, he's got $2.5 million on hand. You've got $400,000 on hand. Now, that Fibermark ad that we saw is not on the air. It is at this point just a web video, although it's quite hard-hitting. You're reliant very heavily as a result on labor, on their get-out-the-vote efforts. Do you not think that you might be too beholden to labor at some point?
No, I have a very broad base of support. I actually disagree with your characterization at the top of our interview. Momentum is very much going in my direction. Look at the numbers of contributors. I don't have the big money interests giving me the large checks, but I have an awful lot of people that are giving $100, $200 checks, and some people that are able to be a little more generous. And yes, we have the support of the working men and women of our state. I'm proud to have the support of labor that represents hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers. And obviously, being part of the Democratic team, we have a huge effort underway to get the vote out. Very proud today that President Bill Clinton came out in support of my candidacy. So we have tremendous momentum going our way.
Well,
you know, the poll that you mentioned earlier, I should point out, the Siena poll is. Yeah, and that's now of likely voters. The earlier poll was of registered voters. It's a more accurate reflection. We're in very strong shape as we head towards November 2nd, and momentum is going my way.
Comptroller, dollar for dollar, you and Harry Wilson, in terms of raising money, are actually almost evenly matched. I mean, you raised about $550,000 between October 2nd and October 22nd, and he's got about $530,000 in terms of contributions. Now, he then put $1 million more into his campaign. campaign,
Right.
and obviously
Right. No, he's put
you haven't done
he's
that.
put almost $4 million in.
Correct.
That's not something I can do. I'm a middle class person, grew up in a working class family. I can't do that. But I don't think this election is about how much money someone is putting in to try to buy this office. This is a very important public office. People get that. People understand that we had terrible problems before I came into the office. We've turned it around, and that's a record of someone who's been tested, someone who can be trusted, and that's why the momentum is coming in my direction.
But what has your response been then to why every single New York City daily actually endorsed Harry Wilson over you, while saying that you've been a placeholder and a manager between Alan Hevesy, who of course was pleaded guilty to a felony corruption charge with the pay-to-play pension fund scandal, and now, but a number of entities are saying perhaps it's time for someone who has no political ties, like Harry Wilson.
Well, you're talking about 3 newspapers. And you're talking about, I don't know how many editorial board members there are between the 3, but you're probably talking about 30, 35 people. That by no means is a referendum or an accurate poll of what this race is about in terms of where the support is coming from. I think the Siena poll and the other polls that have been out there make clear that I am the one that is in the lead in terms of public opinion. It doesn't mean it's not a challenging race, and we don't have too many days before November 2nd, but I am getting my message out to as many voters as possible. I'm very proud of the various organizations that have endorsed my candidacy. I'm very proud that former New York City Mayor Ed Koch, who's been leading the effort for reform in Albany, that he's endorsed my candidacy. I mentioned President Clinton's support earlier, all the labor support, environmental groups, Sierra Club, League of Conservation Voters, pro-choice groups. There's been a broad array and coalition of organizations that are supporting me that represent real people. The writers on the editorial boards, I certainly welcome support. There are a lot of papers that haven't weighed in yet, but I will stand with the kind of broad-based support that I've earned. We're headed to a victory on November 2nd. I'm confident of that.
Okay, just to be clear though, are editorial board writers real people?
They're real people, but there are less of them than there are of the public, and I don't think that you should judge what the public thinks about candidates based on what a few editorial board writers write. And as I said, Liz, there are other papers still to come out, and we'll see. Probably next week we'll see some more papers, including important papers. I know everybody likes to focus on New York City, but Buffalo News we haven't heard from, Newsday we haven't heard from, Albany Times Union, Syracuse Post-Standard. There are several papers that haven't weighed in yet. And I'm hopeful that I'll get the support. But you know what? What matters is not what an editorial writer writes. What matters is what the voters say on November 2nd. That's the only expression of opinion that counts. And I'm reaching out to those voters and explaining what I've done and my plans for helping to be part of turning the state around. And I'm looking forward to having the support of the voters, the real people who make a difference, who understand that this office has an impact on everyday New Yorkers, and the kind of worst of Wall Street values that Harry Wilson represents is not what we need in the Comptroller's office.
We will actually be finding out soon enough, because the election is actually just less than a week away. And in the meantime, I want to thank you very much for joining us. We're unfortunately out of time.
Thank you, Liz. I appreciate it.